Gracias a todos por estar aquí hoy y gracias a Estela por invitarme. Es un placer veros a todos aquí. Vamos a hablar sobre un tema de negociaciones que a mí me apasiona. One of the focuses of today's talk is about win-win negotiations. I called it win-win plus. It's not just everybody winning, but it's about getting all the value that's available to get. Which is something we very often forget to do or don't think about. So the first thing we're going to look at, we're going to actually do an exercise, okay? It's about position-based negotiations. It's the typical methodology that almost everybody uses when they negotiate, okay? We're going to look at that first, and then we're going to look at another method we're going to present with, which Stella already knows, which is a win-win approach. It's called interest-based negotiations. We're going to look at that later. So we're going to do an exercise, and I think we have about the same number of people on this side of the room as on that side. So we're going to have two teams, okay? We're going to have the team on this side and the team on that side. And we're going to do a simple exercise. So we have a grid here, fill in the squares, and every time one side of the room fills all the squares, okay, then you get a point for that square, okay? So you guys can, I don't know, get together and decide which square you want me to color in. You can be the color blue, for example, and you can be red, okay? Anybody?
One more?
Just one more.
No.
Just
We will
choose
not
anyone.
win.
H3.
What is it?
H3.
In the end, it was very difficult to get any points because every time one of the sides almost got close to filling a square, the other side would block them. So it was very difficult. Okay. So unfortunately, nobody was able to get any points. So we find that typically when people get into a negotiation, they what are some of the things they want? Can you think of the exercise we just did? What are some of the things that you're looking for? You can raise your hand if you think of any ideas. When you're entering a negotiation in business, in your private life, with your siblings, with your parents, when you go to a store, when you go to a flea market, what is it that you want? What is it that you're looking for?
The first, I think, is to convince.
To convince, you want to convince, you want them to understand your point of view and to convince them about it. Yes, go ahead.
To lower the price?
You want to lower the price. You want to gain value for yourself, right? That's normal. We say that we often want to win. We want to get what we want. We want to gain our objectives, but we don't necessarily care about the other side. That's pretty much what we saw in this exercise. Each side of the room was trying to get as many squares as possible, and if they needed to block the other side, they did, because they wanted to get the most number of points themselves. They didn't care so much about the other side. So that's what we find with this type of negotiation. And this is the most common type of negotiation tactic everywhere around the world. In Spain, in America, in Asia, not amongst themselves, but amongst Asians and foreigners, this is typically the type of negotiation methodology that they do. Okay, so what we like to use a metaphor of a chess game, okay, or a checkers game, where you're not telling your strategy to the other side. You kind of have if you're playing poker, you have your cards close to your chest, and you're trying to strategize to get the maximum number of points, but you don't really want them to get any points. That's a typical characteristic of a position-based negotiations approach. Okay, so what we find is that typically people are competing. You're competing with the other side. We all have a very ingrained competition gene inside of us. We want to be the best. We're taught at a very young age, when we play sports or when we do exams, everybody wants to get the best value, the best number, and you always want to be at the top of your class. Our society in general looks for a very competitive approach. Unfortunately, we call it that we end up with a zero-sum game, okay? Which means that whatever you win, they lose, okay? That's the typical position-based negotiations result. Whatever you win, if you manage to lower the price, that means that they don't make as much money, right? If you're playing chess, every time you take one of their players, they lose a player, they lose a piece. So whatever you win, they lose. That's very typical, okay? And it's based, usually the position-based negotiations approach is based on the give and take. I give you something, you give me something in return. So you're always getting something in return for whatever you give. There's never any new value being created. And usually, I don't know if you heard about this saying that a good position-based negotiation means that nobody's happy. That's when you know you've really got a good deal in a position-based negotiation. But if neither of them are happy, you know you've got a good deal. Okay? I don't know if that's good. Okay, you know what? We'll give you an example. I think it was in the 1960s, the United States and Russia, well, the Soviet Union at that time, they were trying to negotiate a non-testing treaty. They didn't want to test nuclear weapons, okay? Because nuclear weapons, they contaminate the environment for everybody. It's a big problem. So they were trying to limit the amount of nuclear testing that they had above ground. But after at least 5 years of negotiating in Stockholm and Reykjavik and in all parts of the world, they weren't able to come with an agreement because they couldn't agree as to how many inspections they were going to have. In case the other country detected a seismic movement, they wanted to be able to go to the other country, to the Soviet Union, and do an inspection. So they couldn't agree to it based on the number of inspections. The Russians, they only wanted 3 inspections a year, and the Americans, they wanted 10 inspections a year. So they argued about the number of inspections in Reykjavik and Stockholm, and they just couldn't agree. And it was so silly. Just, why not just choose 5 or 6 inspections? Well, the Russians didn't want to increase the number of inspections because they didn't want Americans in their soil, and kind of meddling in their business. And the Americans, they really wanted to have at least 10 inspections because they don't want the Russians to do any additional testing and for any testing to go undetected. So what they didn't realize is that one inspection could be 100 days of one person or 5 days of 100 people. So an inspection could really be defined in very different ways. There was a lot of latitude as to what an inspection could mean. So there was a lot of room to make an agreement. But unfortunately, the Russians were entrenched. They really wanted to have at least no more than 3 inspections, and the Americans insisted on having 10 inspections. So they weren't able to reach an agreement after 5 years of negotiations. Very difficult. So what we find is that oftentimes people entrench themselves. They become identified. They defend their positions so much that they develop a new interest in protecting those decisions, those positions. And it's almost like their ego becomes identified with that position. And it's very hard for them to look for any other options. So it has to be that way. So unfortunately, because each side becomes entrenched in their own position, they're not able to reach an agreement in some points, unless they compromise. Other times, relationships are compromised. Why? Well, because you have to forget about your real needs, your real interests, and sometimes you have to succumb. You have to give in to somebody else's inflexibility. So you feel outrage and resentment. Oftentimes relationships are really damaged by this type of negotiations strategy. An inefficient agreement. Does anybody, this is a difficult one, I think. What we mean by inefficient. Why do you think that a position-based negotiations approach is actually very inefficient? It's inefficient. And I'm going to give you an example of this because it's the best way to explain it. You know what? There's a family, right? A family of 4. There were the 2 parents and 2 children. And Saturday morning comes along, the parents want to sleep, and the children are screaming in the kitchen. There's 2 girls screaming. Hey, that's my fruit. No, that's mine. I saw that orange yesterday. I want it. And the parents are like, what is that raucous? This is crazy. So the parents, they're like, we want to sleep. It's our only day to sleep, and our daughters are making all this noise. So they go down to the kitchen, and they're like, what's going on? And one daughter says, Mommy, Daddy, I saw that orange yesterday. I wanted it. She's like, well, I got here first, so it's not yours. Oh, wait a second. So the mother, she goes and gets the orange, takes the orange, gets a knife, cuts it in half, and gives each daughter half an orange. Next thing you know, the daughters are both happy, big smile on their face, but each one of them goes to one side of the kitchen. One daughter juices the orange and drinks it, and the other daughter starts peeling the orange peel because she's going to make a cake, an orange cake. So yes, they're both happy. It's a Solomonic approach. Everybody's happy. But is it an efficient approach? Not really. It would have been much better if one daughter got the full orange and she squeezed the whole orange and had a bigger orange juice and drank it, and the other daughter, she could have had the whole orange peel to make a bigger cake. That would have been a more efficient way of making an agreement. Okay? So that's what we mean by this position-based approach is normally not efficient. Okay? Normally you're not capturing all the value. Okay?